Good morning.
Good morning.
Knowing how to be happy, imaginative, compassionate, wise, and relevant as a human being is not easy. I find much of my frustration is coming to terms with that fact. And we search for answers in many ways. Opinion, conversation, reading, study, training, all of those are fine. But the point in mindfulness practice is about direct experience. This is what knowledge means in Buddhism. The experiential encounter with your own insight. And all this stuff gets written up. Books and sutras and rituals and temples get built and all this. But you have to remember that human insight preceded all those manifestations. And that insight comes from our own heart and our own mind. But it is difficult, I find, to access this insight because we are profoundly distracted by our human nature, on one hand. We're also profoundly distracted by the conditioning of the modern world. We're in such a hurry to achieve things, all the while forgetting the world is full of ruins of great achievements. Does that mean the achievement should have not taken place? Does that mean our ancestors should not have wasted their time and energy in building the great civilization of Timbuktu? No, it does not mean that. It means that whatever we build is not a separate self-entity. Whatever we construct, whatever we build, is a formation. It's an amalgamation of many things. Of time, of energy, of thought, various forms of creativity. And that flows. So another way to look at what's no longer is it's still in the flow. So it's like surfing. I guess you have to make sure what wave you're on. You could really get confused. I've even seen some people try to go backwards. I don't have to predict their outcome. The ocean takes care of that. So we want to turn our attention today to the third foundation of mindfulness. And we're going to do a little overview of that and some practices associated with that third foundation. And other words for foundation of mindfulness throughout different translations of Buddhism. In Chinese, it's often called grounds of mindfulness rather than foundations. Other translations refer to it as methods of mindfulness. The point is, these are the objects of meditation to train our attention to focus on. And when we train our attention to focus on our body, or our feelings, or our states of mind, which is what today is about, we cultivate our residual awareness. In neuroscience, I would say we are taking charge of directing our neuroplasticity. We are intentionally deciding, literally, how our brains are shaped and how our nervous system functions, as much as we can as individuals influence it. So these exercises can reveal to us the wisdom of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas that is hiding inside of each one of us, obscured. Some of you have been to our place here on Vashon. We live next to Sarah, for which we're very grateful. And we have a giant, we're told, 100-year-old walnut tree. And as the myth of spring emerges here, birds are appearing from everywhere. It's like living in a bird sanctuary. Most recently, this past week, we had a visit from a giant bald eagle, which at first we thought it was whatever. We didn't know what it was doing other than checking things out. But then it came back 2 more times and settled in the tree. And then there's hummingbirds and robins and all kinds of birds. The tree is not confused. The tree knows it's the host, and that the birds are the guest. So the first way we get confused about the nature of our mind is not understanding the difference between the host and the guest. Much of our life is spent in fight, flight, or flee, triggered by the guest. There's movies about all this stuff, right? Most of them, however, are horror movies. Scary stuff coming in, right? So what we're learning during this program, because every time I use the word mastery, I have to laugh, because what we're saying by using the word mastery is this is something worth spending my life learning. That's what I mean by mastery. And we're overall, all 6 sessions, we're trying to master 3 things. One is awareness of what's happening in our mind, whether that's the mind as the body, or the mind as feelings, or the mind as mind itself, which we'll come to today. We are trying to master, trying to learn how to shape our mind so that we are not simply victims to what lands in our tree, or who flies by, or who visits the inn, or how long they're going to stay, even though we wish they'd leave sooner. And we're learning how to liberate ourselves from our own mind's tendencies to cling, to grasp after, and define ourselves by the guest. It's a walnut tree. It's not a robin tree. It's a walnut tree. It's not a bald eagle tree. So the practice of mindfulness of mind is applying the skillfulness of these 3 things to, this way. What does mind mean here in Buddhism? And depending on what traditions of Buddhism and the translations thereof, you will get different variations of the meaning of mind. But the most important meaning of mind is state of mind. So, I wrote down the meditation question for today. And it is, whoops, it sounded a different thing, but it's in my head. Where is your mind right now? What state is your mind in right now? And a state of mind includes several things. One, it includes images of ourselves and images of our world. Images of what is near to us, images of what is far, we think, far from us. A state of mind includes emotional tones. One way of describing a state of mind is it's like a mood. The third aspect is that questions come up in different states of mind. And depending on the state of mind, life might be asking you different questions for you to answer or for you to respond to. So where do states of mind come from? There's lots of ways of talking about this, but since I've been working particularly the last 2 weeks on the Yogacara tradition of Buddhism, I'm going to use that model, which is very consistent with Thich Nhat Hanh, where you also find it in Tibetan Buddhism and in Chinese Buddhism, etc. And that is this model of consciousness, of 8 qualities of consciousness. Eye, circle, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind consciousness. But there's more. It's like a commercial. Then there is manas, M-A-N-A-S, manas consciousness. And manas consciousness is the quality of consciousness that all of us have that makes us all like Miss Piggy. And that means every experience we have is about moi, we think. It could only be about moi. How could it possibly be about anyone else? Let's say some more. Down here, you've heard and seen this image in Thich Nhat Hanh books especially, but also in any recent work on Yogacara Buddhism. These are seeds or potentials or energies or patterns of habit in our store consciousness. And think of store consciousness. We had some dear friends who brought us some great noodles. Thank you, Miriam. From last night. They were at Costco. And, this might tarnish your image of Buddhism, but think of store consciousness as a giant Costco. There's all this stuff, aisle by aisle, stacked up, on sale, bargain prices. Our minds are like that down here. But also down here is the energy of Mother Teresa, the grace of Nelson Mandela, the power of Martin Luther King, the genius of Teresa of Avila, all in our store consciousness. So when people ask me, why do I seem not to be completely worried about where we're going in the world? It's because I know what's in the storehouse. And not only do I know what's in the storehouse, I know how to access it. And not only do I know and have learned and keep learning how to access it, think of a magic show, and you're all prepared to pull the rabbit out of the hat, which is kind of like our life. We're always all prepared to pull out our latest trick. And you may have seen this in a cartoon. You reach in the hat and, rah, it's not a rabbit. Something else came out of the hat. Some jealousy came out of the hat. Or the jealousy bird visits your tree. Or the angry bird. There's a hole. You think that's popular for no reason? Right. Look into our modern consciousness and look at what a young person picked up and identified. Dominant in his life, he's describing the storehouse. But beauty is also here. Music is here. Wonder is here. But so is hate. All in this. Every time we have an encounter, an experience with life, either with our eye, our ear, our nose, our tongue, our body, or mind, and by mind an experience of ideas, an experience of information, a challenge or an experience of our own self-identity, every time we have an experience in our life that impacts one of these, something blossoms in our mind from our seeds. Unavoidable. Something is, any one of these things. It's a little weak, let me change the color here. We did some work when I was getting certified with the Search Inside Yourself people on triggers. We're working on emotional intelligence. And it's really important to know your triggers. And there was a young man from Malaysia in the program, from Singapore, delightful guy, professor. And so he was asking me offline for an example of a trigger, because it's not a common phrase where he's from. So my mind, this is not how old I am, I just pay attention to history. My mind went to a movie clip of W.C. Fields. And he says, who is that? So we go to the internet and Google W.C. Fields. One of his most famous scenes is he's been drunk again. He was found on the streets and he was about to be taken to jail so he could sleep it off overnight. So as the police officer is taking him to put him in the jail cell, he says, you must remember one thing. With this prisoner, do not mention Niagara Falls. And of course, 3 minutes later, after he's in the jail cell, all alone with this really big guy, he mentions Niagara Falls. And the guy starts chasing him and he's going to beat him to death. He gets out and he asks the policeman, what's up with Niagara Falls? He says he got married in Niagara Falls and shortly later got divorced in Niagara Falls. And so he's not happy to remember that. But do you know the phrases that trigger you? The looks, the sounds, the ideas? I've been noticing myself in what I'm willing to look at, or how long I can look at something. And I notice I have trouble looking at certain images in today's world. I can't dwell on them very long, because I know if I do, what comes up is Niagara Falls. I'm serious, I experienced it. All I have to do is read a newspaper, cut on the TV, check the internet. And I'm just trigger, 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 trigger. So I practice so those triggers don't determine my life. And that's entirely up to you. That's not my job. That's your job. But we learn mindfulness of mind so we can become skillful in, oh, that's coming up. So that we can feel that. I'm not talking about thinking about that. We can actually feel that energy rising in our body, rising in our heart, rising in our mind before it becomes outflow. And so I practice to be able to recognize and name the state of mind that's rising in me, present in me, and influencing me. And I practice to know how, if that state of mind is not wholesome, how to change that state of mind. Or if that state of mind is wholesome, how to get more comfortable embodying that. So part of this is, let's try this. So part of the issue here is our awareness, which I've already mentioned. But part of what we have to remember about awareness is that there's many, many levels. Many, many levels. It's like what starts to happen when you begin meditating and discover and you get relaxed enough where your mind starts to reveal itself. We've had that happen in our backyard. When we first moved, you all know it was full of blackberry bushes. But we've had people out with heavy equipment, not really heavy, but heavy enough. And the first time they took a swipe through the yard, it was like, oh no! It's like, here's a bathtub, here's some goat bones, here's some... Our minds are like that. And that's okay. The practice is to learn, do I want this bathtub or not? If I don't, I figure out how to get rid of it. And so I look at our minds. We were at a Great Vow Monastery recently. And part of the young people and staff there are just starting a journey of coming into awareness of white privilege. And so it's popping. Goat bones, bathtubs, piles of garbage, inherited and created. The practice is to learn, as Thich Nhat Hanh likes to say, to be a skillful gardener of your own heart. And to learn how to turn garbage into compost, rather than pretending there's no garbage. This is part of our dilemma. We want to have beautiful flowers without the journey of being the gardener, of sticking our hands in the mud or in the shit or whatever. No flowers without doing the work. Spiritual life is not drive-through shopping. It is not a mall of all the possibilities that you can buy. It is an invitation to have the courage to embrace your precious life. And to embrace it in a way that can help others embrace theirs. So where is your mind right now? So our awareness is part of this journey. So is our attitude. it's really easy to, I had a lot of friends at university when I was teaching at Claremont Graduate University in Education who, there's a whole department on positive psychology. And so somebody gave them my name to send me a survey. And so because I knew some of the people who worked in that department, I thought I took a look at their survey. And they had a list of about 15 questions. And one question was, are you happy when you do that? Or not happy when you don't do that? And all these questions, and I kept going through, I kept looking for a question I can answer without falling into dualism. So the key attitude in this practice is an attitude of non-duality. An attitude of wholeness is what that means. What this means in practice is, if my anger comes up in my mind, I'm in a mental state of anger and I'm flustered, what does that mean? That means now I'm going to shift from the tree to the bird. That means this anger is also me, with small m. This fear is also, it's in me. It's a part of my experience of being human. The birds in the tree are part of my experience of being a tree. And our tree, I've been watching it, it isn't throwing out any of the birds. It's allowing them to arrive. Without blame, without judgment, without condemnation. And that's the first stage of the practice, to learn how to receive what comes up in us and what comes toward us without blame or judgment. One of the issues I have with the modern, most recent interpretations of mindfulness is it stops there. No, that's the first step. That's not the last step. The next step is, if what comes up in my mind is not wholesome or leads me toward suffering, why would I keep it? And if I do want to have that as a part of my life, how do I do that in a way that it doesn't outflow that suffering onto others? Others around the kitchen table, others in my town, in my city, in our country. The third attitude, Peggy talks about this a lot, is an attitude of faith. And faith in Buddhism means confidence based on experience. And faith means, I know that if my anger bird shows up, that's okay. I know how to recognize that. I know how to name that. I know how to respect that. And part of respecting is knowing this is actually happening in me. Instead of coming over and handing it to you. And then blaming you for having it. That's what we do. If we're not skillful with ourselves, that's what we do. Now, if you ever grew up and you had brothers and sisters, siblings, and you know what would happen if someone broke a dish in the kitchen at my grandmother's house, and my sister and I and two friends are in there, and my grandmother walks in and everybody goes, "She did it!" So we have a whole society right now around the world, but especially here, who is still living and functioning at the level of consciousness of children. Now, I'm not talking about your inner child in the sense of what's been wounded or damaged, though you can't ignore that. I'm simply saying our level, our attitude is childlike. And our problems are not the problems of children. The third piece, so awareness, the attitude we bring, and next is skillfulness. It takes some training. I remember when a friend of mine who had a golf school in Palm Springs, I went through the school with him one time to help him out, and people show up for the first time and go, well, that looks easy. And he would always say, well, here's a golf club, here's a ball, see what your experience is. And there'd be people out there for hours, cursing and screaming, and what the hell, how, where'd the... It's not as easy as it looks. People enjoy the presence of Thich Nhat Hanh at retreats, and he's so peaceful, he's so calm, he radiates such beautiful energy. You must remember, he learned how to do that in the midst of the Vietnam War. He didn't learn that from a book. He didn't learn that from a conversation. He learned that through the pain of practice and learning how to take the suffering that comes up in him, caused by the external world or the internal world, and to transform that suffering. But first, by recognition. And having the courage to recognize what's going on in ourselves. It's a huge step. So in order to do that, one more thing that's part of the attitude and skillfulness is whatever state of mind you may find yourself in, and in Mahayana Buddhism, there's 52 states. Because Buddhism names everything, right? So, the point is, there are more than that, but the point is, these are the states that are either wholesome or unwholesome, that either lead towards suffering or away from suffering, and that's the concern. It is not any state. We tend to generalize Buddhism, so now, it can solve every problem. I had a friend of mine whose wife passed away, and I knew them a long time, their whole marriage. In fact, I did their wedding. And he came up to me right at the funeral, which she asked me to do before she passed away, and said, I thought Buddhism meant you weren't supposed to die. So I said, well, where did you get an idea like that? You can't ask the Buddha, he's dead. So it's important to be clear about our practice. According to one of my Tibetan Dharma teachers, he puts it this way: since our goal is to overcome confusion and fully wake up, we need to start by relating to the mind and work with it directly. Before we take such training, however, it's essential that we see just what we are training. We can ask, why is all this training necessary? What we need to see is that our mind is not just a busy mind, but that there are areas of our mind that are in a state of darkness or ignorance, like states of deep sleep. And that darkness stops us from seeing clearly in ourselves and outside of ourselves, and stops us from doing things well. His statement reminded me of a book I recommend. I think nobody reads it, but if you get a chance, Carl Jung's book he wrote right after his journey in World War II, The Undiscovered Self. This is about this practice of mindfulness of mind, is the courage to develop the energy of mindfulness that shines light on the dark places of our hearts and mind. And I don't know, many people are afraid of the dark. Actually, James Baldwin has a whole thing about race and fear of the dark, which I probably represent. Our practice of mindfulness is to build in ourselves, remove in ourselves the clouds that block the light so that we don't see what's dark in us. And when we don't see what's dark in us, we don't see what's dark in others that we can identify with. Okay, this is back to attitude. Now we can see dark in others that we don't want to identify with. But we pretend we don't have it. So much of our suffering in the world today is around unskillfulness, unawareness of our mental states and how they influence what we see, what we think, and how we behave and how we speak. Thich Nhat Hanh, we need to wake up these dark spaces in ourselves, because these dark spaces in ourselves are reflected in our society. It cannot be otherwise. This is the whole teaching from early Buddhism on outflows. Whatever is in us flows out. So we work, we practice, so that the best of what we have in us becomes strong enough and has enough momentum to flow out. Even if we're not even conscious it's flowing. I'm sure Thich Nhat Hanh, the first time I met him, when he walked on stage, had no idea I was in the audience. It still changed my life. That's what I mean. I'm sure when Martin Luther King came to my high school and we passed coming in and out of the mundanity of the men's room, he had no idea how that changed my life. I'm talking about outflow. And outflow isn't just thinking of things in a literal manner. Outflow is energy. And we all are giving off energy all the time. Our words try to carry it, our actions. Thich Nhat Hanh likes to say, the instruction of the Buddha for mindfulness of the mind is simple. Look at the mind as mine, not as my mind. Look at the mind, as an experience of mind, but not my mind. And Thich Nhat Hanh likes to say, it seems like really simple, but when you put it into practice, it's profound. So it's like in working with the body in emotional intelligence. For example, anger may be coming, I may be experiencing anger, but most people have no idea that their anger they experience, or the joy they experience, or the sadness they experience, is flowing through their own body. And anger and sadness and joy flow through bodies. That's what they do. It's not my anger. My joy is a physiological experience I'm having. It is also a mental state I might find myself in. So we want to go, this is Miss Piggy again. This is my anger. Oh yeah, then we can get all up in that. Like that makes us something other than what we are. In fact, it's just the opposite. It reveals to us our humanity and the universality of human experience. No owner. The Tibetan traditions always try to remind us this. Whatever you're experiencing, it's a real experience, but don't own it. Because the moment, it's like buying a house. Okay, we just bought a house, now we have all this shit to do. Right? Something breaks, oh my God. There's nobody that calls it, hello Larry, the faucet just stopped working. Our practice needs to be, we need to know who we're calling. And it is ourselves. But not only that, how is the mind right now? Because in this practice, we are present moment. There's a great sutra on dwelling happily in the present moment that suggests to us not to get caught in past states of mind or wishing I had a state of mind I had when I was 30, whenever that was, if that was. You have to please remember, we're all in constructs, people. So when people have been asking me, well, how old are you? I have been told. I do that on purpose. So when I find something, I go to a restaurant and I have a bite of something and I don't like it, I try to be as precise as possible so I don't confuse myself. I did not like this because it set my mouth on fire. And I wasn't looking for fire at this moment. Always keep things clear so that you are conscious of what you're saying. Our language betrays our experience profoundly. So the Buddha asked a series of questions. I'll read them slowly. First is, when I ask, how is my mind right now? Is there desire? Nothing wrong with desire. It's just asking the question, is there desire in my mind? Is that what's up? Or is there hatred or aversion in my mind right now? Also, the other word that came up for me as I was practicing with this is resentment. Is there resentment? Is there energy of resentment occupying my space? Has the bird of resentment taken over my tree? Is the mind in the present moment? And is it tensed or relaxed? Here's some of the earlier old language in Buddhism translated into English. Is my mind narrow or wide? Is it concentrated or distracted? Is it noble or is it suffering without relief? Is it surpassable or limited? Is my mind limited? Have I boxed myself in with my mind? We're having a problem with our chimney and a guy came by to fix it. And the first time he came, he didn't quite get it right. So we called him back. And he came back a second time. And so I decided to help him out. I don't know anything about chimneys except what they're supposed to do. And this wasn't happening. And so we started looking at things. And I said, hey, what about that? What if we did that? And it worked. And at the end he goes, where'd you learn to work on chimneys? I didn't learn to work on chimneys. I learned to pay attention. And not be afraid of having the wrong idea. Not being afraid to make a suggestion because I'm not an expert. It's kind of like that. And we have a crisis of Dharma training in the United States. And many of the people who have been most associated with the Buddhist tradition, people now called, what are we, are we Gen X's, or what are you, a millennial, or?
Baby boomer.
A what?
Baby
Oh yeah, baby boomer. Guess I don't really like that term. That's somebody, that's another construct. Not that it isn't accurate. My point is, it's not true. That's not all we are. So other people call it the graying of American Buddhism. Okay, other people call it the whiteness of American Buddhism. Saw a great article from some Asian friends that 67% of the Buddhists in America are Asian. Why don't we see them on our magazines? Why don't we hearing them on Sounds True? 300 years ago, there were Buddhist practitioners here in the United States. They were Chinese and they were working on railroads. Some of whom were as slaves, some of whom were indentured, and some of whom were sold into prostitution. I think anyone who is serious about the Buddhist tradition needs to learn something about Buddhist history, or you will not understand. You want to understand where it came from, for the purpose of helping it to go where it needs to go, not for the purpose of just playing with history. I don't study history because I just fun. For me, this is about how does this inform my life and what I should do with my little self in this world. Okay, practices soon. So, learn to look at your mind as if you're looking at a mirror. I know this could be a little scary. Okay? So, one of the things to remember in terms of attitude as you do this, or as things come up in your practice, everything you see is empty of a permanent separate self. This is why you should not be intimidated by any state of mind that comes up. Happiness is not something packaged. It is a combination of many things that cause that seed to rise and bloom. So is so with sadness. So is so with all of our experiences are created by causes and conditions that have led to their existence. They're not out of nowhere. When people say to me, well, I don't know how that happened. Well, I do. I know how that happened. This seed got watered. This seed got nourished. This seed got attention given to it, and so it grew. I had a friend yesterday I was chatting with who was on a vacation, kind of honeymoon, and she and her partner had just gotten married, and they were at this swanky kind of restaurant to celebrate, and the owner of the restaurant came over and started telling inappropriate ethnic jokes, and they called him on it. And he said, well, don't blame me, it came from the table over there. And my friend says, yeah, but you brought it to our table. And they got up and left without paying the bill. Yeah! This is what we got to start doing, people. We got to give up being so damn nice. I'm serious. We got to understand that Bodhisattva of great compassion has a lot of faces. One has a description of 11. I found 33. And we need all 33 to help us through where we are now stuck in this world. And it's where we're stuck inside that keeps us stuck where we're stuck outside. And it's where we're stuck outside that keeps us stuck where we're stuck inside. Morphin tide. So not only is this about awareness, what states of mind, but it's also the next level. This is beyond no blame, no judgment, receive all experience. Okay, now we got to go to work. Okay? The next level is to examine the causes for that. Where did this come from? Let's say that came from somewhere, some condition, some cause, some happening, some event, some part of the history of store consciousness. So we have everything the human race has in its consciousness in each of us. Thich Nhat Hanh was actually asked once, do you have anger in you or you have hate in you? It says all of us have everything in us. The question is what we nourish. But we don't have to be intimidated by our sadness, which is a normal human experience. We learn to look into our sadness after we receive it without blame or judgment. Then the next step is to look into it and to see what conditions preceded it. It's like going to a restaurant and having a meal and then going home and having a stomach ache. The practice is, what did I eat? No blame, no judgment, just objective. What was on the menu? What did I choose? And what happened to me? And you can look at what happened to you from several different points of view. How did I order it? Did I have it well done? Blah, 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 blah. Was it cold when I ate it? Was it still warm when I ate it? How fast did how fast did I eat it? Maybe it wasn't the food. Maybe it was my own process. You know, some of us grew up in big families, and it's like there's food on the table, it's like, okay? I'm talking about awareness and skillfulness. How to look at what happened. And the reason we want to know what caused it or what conditions preceded it is so that if we don't want it to happen again, we can work on different causes and create different conditions. That's shaping your mind. So I was working, Thich Nhat Hanh had a great phrase that brought up an old song that I really did not like growing up. Where'd it go? Okay. Here we go. The narrow mind. When the narrow mind is present, you know this because you cannot perceive beauty. Nothing is beautiful to you. That also is an indication of how you practice to transform the narrow mind. When my mind gets to be too narrow, I have several practices and I'm always learning. But one of my practices is to look in the eyes of my dog Charlie. And I cannot look long and hold a narrow mind. Actually, I said to Charlie this morning, you're a little scary. Because, like, he saw me lock the front door. He was on the couch in his usual love me position. He saw me lock the side door. He knew we were leaving. And so he followed me around everywhere after that. And then I went upstairs to get something. Then he started following Peggy. It's like, hey, I know what's up. And I thought, if a dog has enough attention capacity to recognize what's happening, maybe we should put the dogs in charge of our education. This is impressive. You know, you have animals, you've had similar experiences, whether it doesn't matter if it's a dog or a horse or a hummingbird. Just yesterday, a hummingbird just came, stood right in front of our face, which is like, beauty. So figure out what triggers beauty in your consciousness and do not separate yourself far from it. Why? Because you're going to need that when you go into hell. Okay? When you march into hell for a heavenly cause, you got to have beauty with you. You won't make it. You'll give up before you get there. So work on recognizing the narrow mind and then bringing beauty into that narrow mind in order to make it wide. And then after I see the hummingbird, after I saw Charlie, I went out in the yard, everything was beautiful. I could start to recognize beauty in every direction. And so now I'm remembering the native teachings on the beauty way. And so, oh, somebody figured this out a long time ago. The beauty way. The antidote to the narrow mind. It may be music for you. It may be a walk in the woods for you, but know those things. There are days, Thich Nhat Hanh says it also this way, the highest mind is the mind which has distanced itself from the field of desires. And what that means to me is the highest mind is the mind that has distanced itself from defining itself by what it achieves from what it wants.
Could you repeat that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm glad it's being recorded because I never know what I want to say. The highest mind is the mind that is not attached, whose identity is not attached to getting what it desires. You see this in the mall with a 2-year-old who wants this toy. I mean, we used to when we ran our florist business, when I used to consult with Albertson's grocery chain, I used to visit stores all the time, and I used to see kids, little people, running their parents. I'm serious. Which astounds me. I've heard children, 4 or 5 years old, talk to their parents as if they were 3 to 4, 5-year-old children. This stuns me. Since as I was growing up, a lot of my communication with my grandmother and mother was a look. That was it. All needed. There was nothing to talk about. You're not where you're supposed to be. What's confusing about that? You're acting out here on the floor for a toy they don't even have anymore. That was last Christmas. What? But we're like this. And we're like this on a global level. There are days when our mind is not narrow and we enter into a mental space of beauty. There are the days when we can seem like love everybody and accept everything. But there are days when we are low, when we can't find beauty and we're not even interested in accepting anything. And this brought up this song that I never liked. One of the ministers at the church I grew up in used to love this song, and he had influence over the choir. So the children's choir had to learn this freaking song that came back to me this morning. It's called "The Storm is Passing Over." Sometimes I'm up, sometimes I'm down. Sometimes I'm level to the ground. But the storm is passing over. Hallelujah. I never liked that song. I think because I never understood that song.
Can you sing it?
Maybe. So it's recognize if your mind is low. Recognize if your mind is high. I had a British friend of mine I worked with in Hong Kong. He came to me one time and said, "Larry, you seem to be low." And I said, "Yes, that's what the blues are for." You don't think the blues just came out of nowhere, right? You understand causes and conditions. And the blues was a skillful means of processing being low. Now, a lot of people, when they feel low, they go completely numb. And I understand trying not to feel so much pain, but at least give yourself a second to feel it, because it means you're alive. It means you're alive. When the highest mind is there, we feel happy, we feel open, we feel generous. But boy, when the narrow mind is in dominant control, you can see what I can see going on all over the planet. Whether this tribal warfare in the Congo or immigration policies in the United States and France. So the first way to, one more quote from Ty. We should not shrink inside of ourselves and allow ourselves to be oppressed by our state of mind. We should not allow ourselves to be caught, to be crushed by it. We must recognize it and then ask for help to transform it. And one example Thich Nhat Hanh uses is, if you have the benefit of having a sangha, you will know that sometimes when you're feeling low, there are people in the sangha that you can literally go sit next to and not say a thing and feel better. Do you have other people in your life where you don't have to talk about everything? I think part of our problem is we keep talking about the same thing over and over and not transforming ourselves. But do you have somebody like that in your life where you can ask for help, even if it's silent energy of beauty, of kindness, compassion, non-judgment, and you can literally sit next to that person and you can feel yourself, your mind, begin to shift from low out. Every one of us needs, and some of us like me, need multiple people to help. This is why every place Peggy and I go, we always start a sangha. It's not because we want to be sangha leaders. It's because we want to be sangha beneficiaries. The first practice, this is an old practice Thich Nhat Hanh learned a long time ago when he was in the monastery. It's called change the peg. No pun on Peggy. Okay? And that comes from an old game people used to play in Vietnam where you move pegs on a board. Okay? The modern image of this is, if the TV show playing in your mind, if the radio program playing in your mind right now is causing you pain and suffering, change the channel. But it takes skill to change the channel. Because so many of our mental states, with their moods and tones and subtlety, are seductive. So all of a sudden we're like swooning with jealousy. I know who I am because I'm jealous. Well, actually, it's quite the opposite. You don't know who you are because you're jealous. If you knew who you are, you wouldn't worry about shit like that. Pardon, little Cleveland came out. Change the peg, change the channel. And so I have a list of things I know that I can do to help me. It's very specific. Do you have a really specific list of things you can do to help you change the state of your mind? All of us need those. These are like, you see all these stories of military people and warriors and samurais are about getting dressed for battle and putting on their uniforms and making sure their swords are right. This is what I'm talking about, only spiritually. Get dressed for your life. Get dressed to be an awake person. Make sure you have the tools you need so you don't confuse the clouds with the blue sky, the birds with the tree. So that don't confuse being the innkeeper with the guest. Change the peg. And there's lots of ways to do that, and we'll come back to that at the end. And every manifestation in our mind is a formation. Technical term in Buddhism, mental formation. And a formation if something is made up. It's a combination of things. That's all. And so you don't have to be afraid of any mental state you're in, because it's not solid. It seems solid. It seems solid. It seems permanent, just like we tend to think of ourselves as solid and permanent. But we aren't solid and permanent either, and neither is any state of mind we experience. It's a flowing energy coming through. But it's so easy to think it's permanent. It's so easy to think it's solid. There's actually a term for this in early Buddhism called the nimitta. And that's a whole nother talk. But it's so easy to latch on to a mental state and give it an image that defines us, that we see everything from that point of view. And everything we see becomes hyperbolically scary or larger than life, and drives us in a direction of thought, of speech, and behavior. The nimitta. So, when I gave a talk last week that started out, I mentioned this before to some people, I used the word, I discovered a quality of bitterness in myself. And I don't mean abstract bitterness. I mean bitterness from my experience of being an African American man in America. And that bitterness was recently triggered, speaking of triggers, as we came back from a visit to Mexico to anchor in a new retreat center there, about how I was treated at customs. We flew back in through Atlanta. Okay. So, not Salt Lake, which is how we went. So, okay, now what do I know about this? How do I practice with this? What I know is, I'm going to Atlanta. And that means something really different than me showing up in the airport of Salt Lake. In perception, in attitude, in history, in conditioning. People at the Salt Lake airport who are in customs, they're like, welcome back. I went through Atlanta, it's what are you doing with a U.S. passport? Plus the search and the pat down but I knew that was coming. So before the plane landed, I called up my internal resources. Right? Because I had just reread the story of Rosa Parks. So I called up Rosa before I got in line. Yeah? And then I had Mother Teresa, who had like a really serious streak of cut that out without having to say anything. So this poor person who was, I don't know what he experienced, but I know what I experienced. I came through undamaged. But what happened in the course of that is bitterness rose up. The energy of bitterness. And so I practiced with Rosa. I called up my Rosa Parks seed and asked, how can I practice with this bitterness? What have you learned about practicing with the bitterness I know you had? And I've had the good fortune of actually meeting her, which was one of the shocks of my life. And she is one of the calmest, kindest rocks you will ever meet. Brings up another old song, I Shall Not Be Moved. So be able to receive what life gives us without pretending that's not what we got. Yeah, this is another place people can like go offline on actual Buddhist practice. My peace is not because I don't have suffering, because I don't experience suffering. My peace is because I know how to practice with my suffering. Or the idea that Buddhism is like really a great spiritual religion of smiley face people. But what we mean by a smile and what Buddhism means by a smile is not the same thing. The smile of the Buddha is a smile of someone who has learned how to change the peg, how to attend to their suffering without pretending it's not there, how to attend to the suffering in society without pretending it's not there, and doing that from a space. Remember the stillness you experienced early this morning here? It's from that space there's enough solidity to transform the world, but from no other space. You step outside of that space, you're like a leaf in the wind. This practice is not inconsequential if you understand it. And you don't have to think big about it. Think about what it means to like be at home with your family, with your friends, with your neighbors. The next, if you cannot change the peg, then you have to figure out how to embrace that state of mind. You have to figure out how you can hold it in your heart and mind. That means we figure out how to be bigger than our experience. And all of our practices, and why we practice first, like we did this morning, is because the calmer we are, the more relaxed our nervous system is, the easier it is for our hearts and minds to hold our experience. So this is cultivation. This is being a good gardener. This is, you know, life has suffering in it. You know, different states of mind come up. We prepare ourselves so we can recognize and receive those states of mind without blame, without judgment, without hatred, and so that we know we can change the channel. And sometimes it's harder to change the channel than others. Okay? Ask for help to change the channel. It's like, hey, I need some help changing this channel. I'm stuck on channel 3, it's killing me. Embrace. And again, you should have a list of 1 or 2 or 3 activities that helps you create a sense of expansiveness in yourself so that you can hold it. Like I can go to a sweat lodge, I can walk in with any state of mind, and I know the state of mind I will walk out with, that will have been transformed. Guaranteed, every time I've ever done a sweat lodge. Every time I've ever done a long retreat. Even sometimes just one acupuncture session. And all of a sudden, my mind's in a different state. So every day, I try to practice putting my mind in a state that allows me to change the peg when I need to, embrace what's emerging without battle. No fight with yourself, because you cannot win. Almost done. I know it's lunch.
Larry, though, before you go on,
Yeah.
I'd love to have you just go through that sensation you have of bitterness.
Mm-hmm.
And how did you change that?
Okay. A couple of ways. But the sensation of bitterness for me had to do with some of the qualities I would associate with it are exhaustion. Said by many other people before me, I am tired of being tired.
Right.
Standing with a hammer.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and once I get in touch with how tired I am of being tired, then it's like, what's the point? And then I'm upset because I can't answer the question. I don't know what the point is. I just know I'm tired. Really, bone tired, deep tired. So tired I ask myself, should I be somewhere else? Where it doesn't take so much of my life's energy to make other people comfortable with my difference. A lot of energy goes into that. Women know. You've been flexing to us patriarchal paradigms forever. It takes energy to anticipate even how subtle, unconscious, to shift, use right language, to sit right, walk right, talk right. You know this. And then we can take any way we're classified and you will find this. One of the biggest shocks to me in my career as a teacher, when I was working with diversity, is something a friend of mine introduced me to called adultism.
Oh, yeah.
Say that word again.
Adultism. I had never seen things that way. The whole world is structured for adults. This is why we have 3-year-olds who think they have to be an adult. It's the conditioning they've received. We take them into a giant store and we say, what do you want? He or she's a 3-year-old who's been surfing the net to figure out what to buy. That's how we are conditioning our children, and it's the dominant unconsciousness. Everything is designed for adults. Or it's like when one of my jobs was the night shift from 11 to 7, 11 at night to 7 in the morning. And the first thing I learned was the infrastructure that was there for the day shift is not available for the night shift. So there's all these workarounds. There's all these things you have to do to adjust so you can do the work. So the bitterness, what I did is I spent a lot of time in the yard, outdoors. I spent a lot of time talking to the deer that now come and sit and walk around our property. I've been talking to every single bird. I've been feeding birds, talking to hummingbirds, talking to trees, and listening to nature. So that was one of the primary practices I did. The second primary practice I did simultaneously is I received my wife's grace. I was conscious of her patience, her support, and her love. while I am working with this. And then I practice with going back through time. One of the practices here is to look at your state of mind, both from an external or outside and from inside. And so it's one of the things I did. I looked at where does this bitterness come from? What's the conditioning for it? It carried me back and carried me back and carried me back. It carried me back finally to 200,000 years of the species. And then I played it forward, right? Through the slave trade, to my moment. And then I looked inside, and what I discovered is what is outside never stays outside, comes in. And what is inside never stays inside. It comes out. So I practice to be aware of all these dynamics. So, look in. Look out. Last thing. I know some of you are hungry. Is liberation of the mind. Liberation of the mind is the process or the journey of freedom from clinging to states of mind. Freedom from over-identification of self, quote unquote, with states of mind. And freedom from the mind itself.
Can you say that?
Yeah. Freedom from clinging to states of mind. Freedom from over-identifying with states of mind. And freedom from the mind itself. And as we do this practice, we have been told in the sutras that we can cultivate in ourselves, we can develop in ourselves an exalted mind. Because we have the seeds of an exalted mind in us, just like we have the seeds of every other kind of mind. And an exalted mind is a mind which can start to see everything for what it is. Just like it is. This is a tree. This is a bald eagle. So we learn to do this with our own mental states of mind. This is sadness. Guest in the house. Okay? But now if we take sadness and we put it in a room in our inn, and then put all these decorations around the room, and then build a monument, and then a shrine, and anybody who comes into our inn, the first room we take them to is our sad room. Just check to make sure in your inn you have more than one room available. You have a wholesome room, you have a joy room, you have a happy room, you have a relaxed room. Not just the room of your most recent wound. The exalted mind is a mind that realizes all phenomena, people, places, things, ideas, are equal. But what does equal mean? Equal means they are all empty of a permanent self-entity. Equal in our emptiness. Equal in our inability to make life something than what it is. Equal in our capacity to learn to be more aware, more skillful, and more free. And it is this freedom that is the ground of imagination, which for me is the key to the future of our society. Our task is not to reimagine yesterday, because we know from neuroscience we just make that up. Every time we go to our memory and we make it up how it makes us feel better or makes us feel worse. But to imagine the future. I'm on the lookout and listen for new ideas about how to do things. And I have a few of my own, but I don't want to mention them because the last time I did, somebody wanted me to run for mayor. So that isn't going to happen, and it's not a good idea. Because, anyway, that would be something I would not be good at.
There, I have a question. So, is it the same as not giving things meaning? Does that mean that things
okay.
have no meaning?
Okay, great question. Her question is that when we say not over-identifying, non-attachment, non-clinging, does that mean not giving things meaning? Brilliant question. No, it does not mean that. It means not giving things ultimate meaning. It doesn't mean not having meaning. We need meaning. Meaning is one of the fundamental characteristics of being human. The issue isn't making meaning. The issue is when I have to make meaning and run over you to make it. The issue is making meaning and thinking that meaning is about moi and not about anyone else. Or that no other people could make meaning. It's one of the things I really enjoy about encountering indigenous people and cultures. Every time I realize, my goodness, because those people make meaning. And for us to assume we're superior to their meaning making, given the evidence of our meaning making, come on, people.
Just saying.
So, I know I'm only covering 3 of these. There's more, but probably enough to practice with for now. There's a handout we're going to give you for homework. And the homework is on the 4 nutriments. And Peggy will. But the 4 nutriments, you ask yourself, what kind of a mind do I want? And then you use those nutriments to create that mind. That's all. And I'm about to be gonged. Thanks for being here.